Good morning, Joe Kent here. I want to talk with you real quick about our national security, the Chinese Communist Party, and our nation's debt, and how they're all deeply intertwined. So the Chinese Communist Party is our nation's #1 threat. The way that they're going about gathering up strategic waterways, strategic ports, the Belt and Road Initiative that essentially is trying to connect China and major lines of commerce all the way throughout Europe and then throughout the Asian landmass, the Eurasian landmass, which is that massive chunk of the world that pretty much stretches from China all the way to Europe. They've been very aggressive economically in this way, so it's a big game of strategic influence. But a big way that they've been threatening the United States is obviously the theft of intellectual property, basically China just taking any great American product, and because they're not subject to patent laws like we are here in the States, they pretty much just replicate that technology and then mass produce it in their slave labor manufacturing plants, and then ship it throughout the world, undercutting our products. So they've also been able to undermine our economy by making their homeland very appealing for major companies to go and set up shop on, because then the major companies can just pay child labor and slave labor rates to get their products made for an extremely cheap rate. So this has become very appealing for many companies. So what the Chinese Communist Party has been able to do with the strength that they've gained is now they're able to go after our status as the prime reserve currency. So the prime reserve currency right now is the US dollar. It's been so since pretty much after World War II, when we became the world's superpower. So this gave us the luxury of being able to sell off a good deal of our debt bonds. So we could essentially sell our debt, a very, buy it now and pay for it later mentality. But we were able to sell our debt because the world had confidence that America and our economy would continue to grow. So our politicians on both sides of the aisle for decades now have not really felt like the debt is real, and they've continued to roll up our debt every year more and more under the justification of either domestic programs or national defense. Typically, Democrats would say, hey, we need to spend more money on things like infrastructure. And what's infrastructure? Well, everything is. We can look at Joe Biden's most recent proposal, trillions more dollars of national debt. Very little of it is actually for infrastructure. It's a ton of pet projects, but this has been very typical of what the Democrats do. The establishment Republicans have not been much better. The defense hawks will pretty much let the Pentagon go hog wild with defense spending. There's numerous examples. Some of the most egregious have been the way that we've allowed the DoD to stay at war for the past 2 decades, because the Congress has been derelict in its duty to declare war, and presidents from both sides of the aisle have been unable to or unwilling to rein in the Pentagon and defense spending. So Republicans like to hide behind, hey, this is all for our national security. And the Democrats say, hey, if you want us to sign on to that bill, then you need to pass this domestic spending bill. That's typically the way that it's worked. So our debt for decades has been wound up by this excessive spending. We were able to do it because we held the prime reserve currency. So while we were doing this and going very, very into debt, and we had our eye off the ball, our eye off of China, because we were fighting the wasteful global war on terror, and then also because there's a school of thought on both sides of the aisle. The globalists that everybody's very familiar with think that, hey, there's no real status between nations. All nations are equal. If we reach out our hand to China, they'll eventually become more liberal. On the right side of the aisle, a lot of the free economic types, they always thought, hey, whatever's good for the market and whatever increases growth without the government messing with it, that's going to be ultimately very, very good for the American people. So if China can produce goods on the cheap, and then the U.S. people get more access to cheap goods. So that's a good thing, right? That's going to make the economy thrive. That's kind of been what the free market folks on the right side of the aisle have always said to justify our relationship with China. So China has greatly exploited this. Like I said, they've moved throughout the world, controlling strategic ports, hoovering up pretty much any natural resource that they can. And now what they are going to do with this strength is they're going to attempt to undermine our status as the prime reserve holder. So then they'll be able to devalue the US dollar, and not just devalue the US dollar like we do when we conduct inflation by printing more money and running up our debt more, but they'll be able to not buy our debt bonds, and then they'll be able to encourage other countries to not buy our debt bonds. If we can't sell our debt, then we are in an extremely vulnerable position. This has led to many countries before collapsing. So that's why I think our debt and the way that the Chinese Communist Party is going about using economic and information warfare is the #1 threat to our nation's security. So what can we do? There's multiple things that we can do from the congressional level. First and foremost, stop the excessive spending. These bills that have gone through, this $1.9 trillion COVID relief, this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure deal, we cannot do them, and we have to balance the budget. No more new spending. We can't raise taxes. We can't squeeze corporations for more corporate tax, because that's going to lead to corporations having to cut jobs and then prices of goods going up with money that people simply just don't have. We must strengthen our economy and make it more independent. So we need to also work on onshoring as much of our manufacturing as humanly possible, especially our critical infrastructure like pharmaceuticals, PPE, as we saw here with the COVID crisis. So balancing the budget is #1. Behind that is onshoring, and then not just onshoring, but we also need to reach energy independence. So we need to be able to not need anything from the Middle East. And then we also need to be able to have more control over the oil markets by being oil independent ourselves. That's going to put Russia in a bind, and then that's also going to put other petroleum producers in a bind, because if we introduce more American energy, more American oil and natural gas to the economy, that devalues everyone else's. So the more of a commodity there is, the cheaper it is. So that's good for us here at the pump, obviously, back home, but it also is going to weaken bad actors in the Middle East like Iran, who just signed a massive oil deal with none other than China. Also, we can all see what Russia's doing right now in Ukraine. So Russia is feeling very emboldened now that Joe Biden is back in office, and they're seeking to launch operations in Iran, or excuse me, sorry, into Crimea and Ukraine. So the reason why they're doing this is because they know that Joe Biden is essentially a very weak actor on foreign policy, has been for 40 years. Plus, the Russians also are emboldened the fact that they can sell more of their oil. So we need to come down hard on NATO countries that are buying oil from Russia, which is quite a few of them, the vast majority of them. So Secretary of Defense Austin and Secretary of State Blinken are flying to NATO right now, and that's the message that I hope that they would deliver. I don't think they will, but we need NATO countries to stop buying Russian oil. So the Democrats like to talk about Russia, and how big of a threat they are, but Russia is essentially a gas station with nuclear weapons. Our economy is 17 times the size of theirs. If we strengthen our economy and we make it so that we are energy independent and our enemies are not able to sell oil to our allies, and we don't bring our allies into stupid multiple decade wars like we did with NATO and Afghanistan, then we are going to be able to economically beat out Russia. China is going to take a lot more work. Like I said, balancing our budget is key to that, and then building strong alliances in Asia based on our economic strength is going to be part and parcel of that as well. We're still going to have to do defense spending, but we don't need to go into debt to do it. The defense spending can be handled in very unconventional ways. We need to look at different programs that aren't just massive warships, massive airplane projects. I can get into all that much later, but we need to fight China the way that they're fighting us, economically and through information warfare. So I hope everybody kind of got something out of this. National defense and national security is something I have a strong background in, and something I feel very passionately about, and I think all of this is very tied into our economy and everything that happens back here at home. So if you have any questions, any comments, please let me know. Please go to joekentforcongress.com. You can send me an email right there. There's an events tab that we just created, so you can come see me. I will be out in Klickitat County tomorrow night, and then Wednesday I'll be up in Lewis County for a town hall, and then Friday here in Clark County for another town hall. So get the details, joekentforcongress.com, the events tab. And if you can, I please need all the help that I can get with my campaign finance. We need to beat out Jamie Herrera Butler and the establishment. It's going to take money and resources to do that. So if you can make a donation, a contribution, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.